Hello and welcome to episode 146 of MMO Weekly, printed as always by Chitty's Cheesesteaks. I'm Sal Manzo, joined by John Luke Chaparro, Matthias Altman Kirasaki. Guys, it's the All-Star break. We're at the end of it now. We had a home run derby. We had an All-Star game. The Met had one All-Star, only because there had to be one. Every team's got to be represented. Juan Soto's good. He got to go there. But overall, really bad first half. Really disappointing. The Mets are 40 and 57, 17 games under 500. Lindor, Bichette, and Soto have played like less than 30 games combined together all year. Pitching really hasn't been good. Everything hasn't really been good. The Mets fired their manager, probably too late. That probably should have happened around when the Phillies did it to their team. But we're going to talk about it. I think we're all going to say kind of the same things. It's a massive disappointment. It's going to be a ghostly second half here, August, September. We'll see what they do with the trade deadline. We'll talk about that. They may get creative and, try and dump some more guys off than even, Merritt may be thinking. But, just want to get your guys' reaction first to the Mets first half here. Very disappointing. Then we'll talk about kind of the All-Star Week's festivities. But Matthias, we'll start with you quick. How bad do you think the Mets are?
I don't even know where to begin, really. So I'll start with some good things here. The outfield, really like the outfield. This is actually, I think, could be one of the best units in baseball with Soto, Ewing, Bench. Awesome. Bench started to look like a big leaguer. Ewing adjusted really nicely. Soto is Soto. The bullpen actually has been mostly pretty good. I wrote the midseason report card for them for MMO, and I only had 3 people who got below a B. Devin Williams, who's been wildly inconsistent. He gave him a C-. CNL Perez, who got a C. He hasn't really pitched that much. And Tobias Myers, unfortunately, I had to give an F because he's like the last couple months has not been very good. The infield has been largely disappointing. Credit to Jared Young. I think he's held his own for a guy who wasn't supposed to be on the roster originally. Bo Bichette has picked it up. But as a whole, I mean, Simeon played through an injury, clearly hurt his performance. Polanco's barely played. Vientos and Beatty, I don't even know what to say there. Ronnie Mauricio, same deal. Lindor, that's the thing with Lindor this year is that, you always get the slow start. He just started to get going, then he gets injured, and that means you get a second slow start. Yeah, that's not great. And then the starting pitching has just been a mess for the most part. Noel McLean's finally figured things out, I think. He's settled in nicely. Christian Scott's been nice. Sean Manaya's slowly figuring things out again, but Freddie Peralta, massive disappointment. Probably the biggest disappointment on the team, if I'm being completely honest. He was brought here to be an ace. He's been far from it. Kodai Senga, not sure what to do with him anymore. They traded David Peterson. Zach Thornton, actually, pleasant surprise. Too bad they blew the game for him. So, yeah, overall, lots of disappointment. Some positives, but really it's hard to feel very good about this team right now. And like you were alluding to it, we're probably looking at a very, very different roster come the next few weeks.
Yeah, disappointment is putting it lightly. Also mildly, or actually not mildly, incredibly annoying because you saw the possible potential that this roster could have generated. Even a guy like Luis Robert Jr. was somebody who was seen as somebody who could really break out. But unfortunately, the cards did not lie the way that we wanted. And, I'll just echo a little bit of what you guys said. Obviously the outfield has been nothing but tremendous. I hate to say that there's a silver lining for somebody getting injured, but, with Luis Robert Jr. going down and opening that spot for AJ Ewing, I think that was really sort of a blessing. And he was able to take it and basically never look back. And Carson Bench has been awesome. And so is Juan Soto. Like you said, Juan Soto is Juan Soto. So you're getting what you're getting. And I'll say this before I go on to the rest of, my disappointments with the team. Juan Soto seems to be slowly trying to help the club sort of gain some confidence. He had some comments during the All-Star festivities where they asked him, what did he think about the Mets season so far? And, how is it looking? Basically the reporter was telling him that they're basically eliminated. And Soto basically said he doesn't see the team with an E next to their name yet. And honestly, as impossible as it is, it technically could happen. And I like to see that from the guy who was supposed to be the guy on this team, or one of the guys on this team, excuse me. But, then, again, you mentioned the bullpen. I'm a little afraid that Stearns is going to, fiddle with that a little too much. I think Luke Weaver should stay. I think AJ Minter should stay. I think pretty much the bullpen should stay the same, with the exception of guys who are on contracts that are either leaving or going to be free agents next year, or you could trade a guy like Kodai Senga, like you did with David Peterson, for a bag of baseballs, because they've just become pretty useless. He's become pretty useless, and I hate to be that, direct about it. Tobias Myers, that's a guy who I think you kind of have to work with and have him, figure things out, because there is a good pitcher in there. And pretty much everyone else in the pen, for the most part, has been nothing but spectacular. AJ Minter's been pretty good. Brooks Raley has been awesome. Huascar Brazaban has probably been, probably his best tenure, part of his, his best, season as a Met so far, ever since they acquired him a couple seasons ago. So they have something there, and they can supplement that with other pieces if they decide to shuffle things around. The starting pitching, like you said, has been nothing but a disappointment. I am incredibly disappointed by Freddie Peralta. That was supposed to be the trade that was going to anchor the rotation. He was fifth in Cy Young voting last year, and I do not know what happened between the plane ride from Milwaukee to New York, where it just hasn't clicked. I don't know why. And I think the frustrating part is how confusing this is, because he was built to be a solid guy for this team. All things led to that. I was so happy about the trade. Sproat and Williams, fine players in their own right, but that's why you have prospect capital to make trades like this. And he really exhibited, in his time in Milwaukee, that he could be a guy. He was a guy in Milwaukee. And so that's kind of really the more disappointing part, is Peralta, because there have been a lot of games this season where the bullpen has either been taxed or Peralta has put the Mets into a hole, and it kind of really sort of just really set a lot of things back. So pretty much the same problems that they had last year kind of turned over into this year. Like you said, McLean is beginning to figure it out. That's nice. Zach Thornton has been a pleasant surprise. I still don't know why they sent him down the last time. Sean Manaea has rebounded pretty nicely with, his pretty decent outings his last couple times out, and I think he'll be a pretty big part going forward. But then that basically leaves a couple of spots to play with at the end of the rotation. David Peterson being the longest tenured Met, it's kind of sad out the way he went out, but he wasn't performing, and you had to cut bait. The prospect they got for him was pretty good. And then we lead to the offense and the infield, and I'm a bit of a delusional optimist at times. I hope Bo Bichette decides not to opt out of his contract. I think that if he has another year, 1 year under his belt with the Mets, I think he'll start off pretty well if he stays here next year. Brett Beatty, Marcus Semien, Ronnie Mauricio, Mark Vientos, gotta go. I'm sorry. You can only experiment with that so much. And if they do well in other places, God bless you. But I really think there needs to be sort of a shakeup in terms of either 2 out of the 3 or 1 of the 3, because it's really more of the same at this point, and you have a lot of younger kids in the minors who can do what they do and better. You said Jared Young has been pretty good so far. Eric Wagaman, surprisingly enough, has also been a decent fill-in player for this team. I never thought I would have said that in 2026. So there's a lot of, and Lindor, you got to ride it out with him. You mentioned the slow start, coming back from 2 basically pretty big injuries. Trading Lindor at this juncture is dumb. I don't think it's logical.
And he has a no trade clause.
And he has a no trade clause too. So your best bet is just to keep him. But overall, it's just been really disappointing and incredibly annoying, this team. Yeah, I'm just really much in a state of shock and disbelief.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all saying the kind of the same sentiment, that it's an extreme disappointment. I mean, another person I think we could talk about. We talked about some of these young guys. You brought up Vientos, Beatty, Mauricio. The theme of this year partly is right. You talk about Ewing and Benj. They're having a nice season. We have to see how they develop. These young guys, these Mets players have had, they have not been able to develop, and that's rearing its head now, especially this year. And Francisco Alvarez needs to be deep in that conversation. This is the former #1 prospect in the whole sport. And at this point, I don't know what you do with him long term. He's not a good catcher, can't really hit, has a history of injuries at this point. it's an interesting kind of debate where, I want to get to guys we think that, maybe going to be moving here at the deadline and such, but is that somebody that, you can maybe get a higher prospect for if you're willing to, send him another way to a team? As a former number one prospect, I think teams would be, apt to do that, right? Would be willing to take that on. Lindor, I agree. Unless the Mets are willing to eat $100 million of that 155 that's left on his deal, not going anywhere. Teams aren't going to take 5 years and $155 million on a 32-year-old shortstop. It's not going to happen. And it's sad for me to say that because it really felt like after that 2024 second half postseason run, he felt like he finally got comfortable here and things were going to take off for him. And when he first got here, I always felt like a comp for him would have been Carlos Beltran, who struggled when he first got to New York, but really figured out and turned out to be one of the better offensive players the Mets have ever had. There's a reason why he's wearing, the Mets cap Cooperstown, right? I thought Lindor was going to be on that trajectory once he had that second half in that postseason run, that he kind of conquered what was New York, right? But at this point, I guess in Mets fashion, right, the fall off the cliff has been, fast and hard and pretty scary because at this point, a guy that we know, you talked about his slow starts, he was one of the better defenders in the sport. The last 2 years, that's fallen back as well. He's got, I think, a .969 fielding percentage right now. It's lower than it's been at any tenure, I think, as a Met. There seems to be I don't want to say a lack of confidence, but I think he's frustrated, right? When he booted that ball in the ninth inning the other day, you could hear the frustration in the interview. And I appreciate him owning it, right? That what makes him a pro. But you could hear it in his voice. There's something going on. You made a really good point, Matthias, as far as like he gets off the slow starts to begin with, then he gets hurt, so you kind of have that happen again when he comes back. He was swinging it pretty well, and now you have the All-Star break happen, so who knows when he's going to really get some consistency under his belt and really get going. But it's a lot of disappointments. I don't want to bring up the Soto and Lindor thing. I don't know how true or not that is. I think the guys have to play a lot together, more than 20-something games in a season, to really make that assumption. Not everybody has to like each other at work, right? You just kind of have to work together. That's another thing. You get paid a lot of money. But I don't know. I know we talked a lot about Stearns. The development part, that's on him. For these younger players, I would say that falls kind of on his lap, being the guy who runs the organization. But obviously they're sticking with him. Cohen came out, somebody said they're not, getting rid of Stearns. I think personally maybe there may be a general manager coming in, someone that does maybe more of the day-to-day baseball stuff, and Stearns handles more of the big picture as the president. I don't know. But I don't see this team the way it is right now. Let's say they go out and sign Tariq Skubal for $400 million in the offseason. That's great. He pitches once every 5 days. You need 4 other guys behind him. You want to say McLean? Sure, 3 other guys. They're not in a position currently that a quick fix, even if Steve Cohen's unlimited pockets, is going to make them a competitive ball club. I hate to say that, but that is the truth of the matter at this point. Even in 2027, 28, I don't see how the Mets can kind of bust out of this unless certain guys develop, which now this regime has showed they can't do that. So that you don't know. And the way the sport is, you don't know if you're going to have a season next year, how that impacts that. And you have teams like the Dodgers, et cetera, that are just kind of so past the Mets at this point that to claw back up, it's not a couple of quick fixes anymore. It's going to take, at this point, an organizational, whatever you want to call it, remix, restart, refresh, however you want to call it, control, alt, delete. I don't care. But this is a team that's going to take a little while now to contend, I think. And unfortunately, you're going to have to look at everyone who's on an expiring contract this year. I mean, like Freddie Peralta aside has been disappointing. You get what you kind of get. But everyone outside of Soto, McLean, Benj, and Ewing, you're making phone calls for. Lindor's probably not going in because, like I said, no one's taking that contract unless you're willing to eat all that money, which I don't think they're going to do. But any of these guys that are on short-term contracts, or even guys with some control that could bring you something back, you're going to have to just hit the reset button here because this team is not going to contend in the short term. I hope they do. I hope they go on a 2019 Nationals-like run, right? Soto was on that team. He knows what that's all about. They just seem like dead man walking. Andy Green just seems like he's sleepwalking to go back to his office in October. He's just steering the ship to get to the end of the season. So I don't know. It's the lowest point of the Cohen tenure for sure, as far as optimism for the future, because it just feels like there's not a lot in the pipeline to give fans that right now.
It's the thing. You mentioned the whole deal with Andy Green right now. Let's look at the other teams that have fired their managers this year. Don Mattingly's Phillies.
Mhm.
That team was 10 games under 500. They're only 2 games back of the Braves right now in the NL East, and they're firmly in playoff position. Then you go over to the Red Sox, who fired Alex Cora. They just came in and swept the Mets. They've won 9 games in a row. I get it. It was a soft part of their schedule, but like you see them starting to figure things out. The Mets ran out of time to figure things out. They fired Mendoza when they were already they were already on the brink when they fired him. You come in to that homestand. All right, it's looking kind of bad because you're 9 games under. You have a chance still during that homestand. You get swept in a 4-game series, then you fire your manager like that. It's just, look, I know that they probably weren't going to hang on to Carlos Mendoza. It's just I'm wondering why they waited until June to do so.
Two months too late. We said it on the show here.
Exactly.
After that Cubs series in May, when he did not, I think it was Nico Horner. He didn't walk to put to set.
It was back in April. Yeah,
that was in April, streak. And during the 12-game losing streak. I thought he was losing his job after. I think we all
same. 100% I did.
So the fact that Stearns, I guess, or whoever, like you said, they knew they weren't bringing him back at the end of the year anyway. They weren't renewing his contract, so I guess they figured, let's see if he can figure it out a little more. But by doing that, you punted your season 2 months later. Again, I hope they can make a change, but I don't gamble, and I wouldn't bet on it because this team just seems completely dead in the water.
Yeah, and I think that, personally, I thought it was going to be after they got swept by the Rockies. He was gone for sure. And again, look, they played well for about 4-5 weeks. And then, completely fell off a cliff. It's just, it's a rough spot for Andy Green to be in too, because he probably didn't know that he was going to be managing the team all of a sudden. So yeah, it's kind of a mess. I can tell that Andy Green really cares about development. He should probably stick in that front office. And that's the thing, we're talking about David Stearns too. If you fire him, who in the world is taking his job? It's a lot harder to find a guy who does David Stearns' job than it is to find a guy who's doing Carlos Mendoza's job. And look, in Milwaukee, he had a great right-hand man in Matt Arnold. Maybe it would help him a bit if he got a GM to help him out. And then, approaching the trade deadline, it's really tough because if they want to have a prayer of being competitive in the short term, like in 2027 even, if you completely strip the bullpen in particular, you're starting from scraps again. Right now, I think Raley and Minter get traded. They're on expiring deals. You can get something for those guys. Heck, maybe you attach one of those slightly less desirable players to that trade. Say you attach Mark Vientos or Kodai Senga or maybe Brett Beatty to one of those deals. I think you get a slightly better return, especially because those guys are rentals. Freddie Peralta is going to be a tough sell. Because it's a contract year and he's having the worst year of his career. But I think some team could buy the fact that, hey, maybe he has something left in the tank. Luke Weaver and Clay Holmes are the two hard guys, I think, here. I know Holmes is a starter, but Luke Weaver, on one hand, is having the best year of his career and is under contract for next season. At the same time, his value probably is never going to be higher. So if you get an offer you can't refuse, you take it. Clay Holmes, it's the same deal. He was having the best year of his career as a starter, but when he got injured, now the injury sort of tanks his value and he's going to opt out, but maybe you try to extend him. Give him the 3-year contract, try to keep him around. But yeah, and then Huascar Brosman's honestly a guy I think I would trade because you got to remember he's in his late 30s. He's not a young pitcher anymore, and he has control, like club control. And again, he's having the best year of his career. I don't know if he's going to get a ton better in coming years. So I think honestly, if there's a guy with club control to trade from the bullpen, it's him.
Yeah. So there's a lot to unpack here. I'm sitting here and I'm listening to both you guys just speak on things. You guys are very right on a ton of things. And I do agree with a lot of what you guys said. The one thing I'll say not with the roster currently constructed, but there are pieces on this team that can put the Mets into contention next season. It's more or less the fringes or the other parts of the roster that haven't been able to connect those pieces together to become a unit. And you're looking at guys like a Vientos, a Beatty, a Mauricio, a Senga, and everyone, and even a Peralta, who have underperformed for this team so far. You made a good point about David Stearns and trying to fire a guy like him, and it's harder for someone to hire someone who does a job like that than it would be for a manager. You look at the Boston Red Sox, for example, when Chaim Bloom was fired, and now he's with the St. Louis Cardinals. Craig Breslow came in and frankly is not doing a great job in Boston. Granted, they're in a nice little winning streak right now, but it kind of seems to be that things are a little bit chaotic in Boston. And now look at Bloom, who has gone to a little bit more of an advisory, different type of role in St. Louis, and a lot of their prospects are beginning to do pretty well out there. So what exactly am I trying to say here? I'm basically saying that this team can win next season. They just need to supplement, but supplement in the right ways, and this leads into a lot of the deadline talk because realistically speaking, Cohen wants this team to win next season, and they have the pieces in place to win. You're not going to have Juan Soto and do a retool like the New York Rangers are doing in hockey. You're not going to get Juan Soto for a rebuild like other teams in baseball are doing. They're going to try and win next season. So that's why guys like, Clay Holmes should be re-signed because he's going to be a steady presence in the starting rotation for maybe at least another 2 years. And he's even said he wants to stay here. So why not try to take that on and see what he can offer for this team? That's what you want. All of these reports coming out about the clubhouse not being as unified or whatever, but then you have a guy literally saying he wants to stay here. So why not take advantage of that? And considering he knows the market already and he knows the atmosphere, he's done well here. Why not? He's proven he can be a solid starter. Obviously you got Tong, Thornton, Scott, and McLean, who can all be viable starters down the line. You would pretty much need to add at least one or two veteran guys to kind of mesh with that, along with Sean Manaea. That's not impossible to do. There are guys out there that they can find. When it comes to guys like Huascar Brazoban in the bullpen, if this were me, and again, this is why I'm just, a guy behind the camera, than a major league executive, I would keep him for one more season. And then see what happens next season if things don't go exactly well, because it's, granted, he probably won't be as good next year as he is this year, but it still seems like he still has some left in the tank, even though he is on the back end of his 30s. Try to get one more year out of him. And then you look at the rest of the team. Like I said, you have to kind of put things together. There is a path for this team to do well. And like you said, Matthias, he had Matt Arnold as his right-hand man in Milwaukee. I legitimately think, like you said, he needs that here because it seems as if maybe, I don't want to say it's too big for him, but it would be nice to have another hand in the kitchen to sort of get their take on things, whether it's the current AGM that's with him right now, who I heard is a pretty good executive, or you bring in somebody else to kind of fill that role and then bump him up. Ideally, if a good organizational structure would be, you have David Stearns, the current assistant GM, as the GM, and then you throw Carlos Beltran in there. Have him have a bigger say if they don't decide to bring him on as manager, and then you bring someone else who was close with the 2 and the 3 to sort of become the manager at this point. So there's a way for this team to really be good next season, because you have, if let's say Bo Bichette stays, that's a strong option at third. You have Francisco Lindor at short, Ewing, Benj, Soto. Then let's say you decide to keep Jorge Polanco, and maybe the smart move would be to move him to second base if you decide to dump Marcus Semien. You get yourself a first baseman. You keep Jared Young as a bench guy. Maybe get a bopper somewhere in free agency. There is plenty of opportunities for this team with players currently on it for them to be good. And with the emergences of Ewing and Bench, granted the player development hasn't been as great lately, but they're on a right direction. And why is somebody calling me right now? That's my house phone. But ultimately at the end of the day, I think this team has, an option and ways to actually do well.
Yeah, I mean, well, first, next episode, we're going to teach the youth what a landline is. Well, that'll be next time. But I hope so. I just, again, I look at team like the Dodgers, the Braves, the Phillies. I just look at the National League at large, and I just where the Mets are right now, even with with the kind of the guys you talk about. I agree. You keep guys like Clay Holmes. He was great before he got hurt, which that was another thing that kind of took the air out of the pitching, right? Losing him was a big blow. But I don't know. I don't know if they're able to develop enough. Can you see Benjamin Ewing do this again next year, take the step forward? I'm not convinced yet because I haven't seen the people that help these players do that. But you hope so. I just it's hard, man. Between thinking the American League, the Yankees, there's a lot of good teams, and I put the Mets now head to head with that. Even with a guy like Soto, who's tremendous, but he's only one player, and I don't know how they stack it up. I don't know how they would retool this either. I think the expiring deals for the most part will go, but I think there is somebody that needs to come in to help, shoulder the load a little bit with David Stearns here, take a little bit of that pressure off him. Listen, the greatest managers have great bench coaches, right? They're thinking ahead for their managers, going up to them, putting things in their ear. Same could be said for in the front office, right? I think that would only benefit. So we'll see what happens there. We'll see who the hell manages the Mets next year. That's a whole other question too. We'll do that for another episode. So I think we'll wrap up the first half for the Mets talking about that. They were really bad. So now we'll move on to All-Star Week. We had a derby. We had an All-Star game. All-Star game wasn't very good. We all have our feelings about the derby, but I just want to touch on a quick All-Star Week. What you guys thought of the derby and the game. John Luke, why don't you start?
So the All-Star game outside of Juan Soto's hit was kind of a snooze fest. Outside of every other sports league, it's probably the best game in terms of all-star games in relation to the other sports. So I can't complain too much. There really wasn't much else to really kind of go on with the game itself, so to speak. It just kind of seems as if, you can just tell the American League is just stacked with pitching for the most part, at least in my opinion. I do find it kind of funny that Cody Bellinger, who is not having the greatest season in the world, ended up becoming All-Star Game MVP. And I can sit here and kind of go on an old man rant about how players nowadays aren't hitting as well as as their counterparts did back in the day with batting average and all that. But I'll save that for another episode so everybody can fall asleep when they go to sleep at night. As far as the Derby goes, I do like the new format. In the sense that they allow the swings instead of the outs. I did like the clock. I basically like all of the iterations of the home run derby that have been presented, with the old school one where it's just the outs with the 10 outs and as many swings as you possibly can. With the timer, I liked it. So this, it wasn't really much of a difference. I really did like Jordan Walker kind of quieting the Philadelphia crowd. That was nice to see because those fans deserve nothing good. So that was pretty nice to see. And then also I just kind of had this thought, just looking at Kyle Schwarber back in a Phillies uniform, and I just thought, man, I just really wish that the Mets had just kind of pushed a little bit more in terms of that contract, because I really think Schwarber could have really made a difference on this team this year, especially with a guy like Juan Soto, and then with the emergence of Benj and Ewing, and even a guy like with Bichette in the middle of the lineup. But hopefully they're able to do that the next offseason. But the Derby was fun. The Netflix production was a bit off. You can tell that this is kind of their first foray into live sports and broadcasting, especially when they did opening day, Yankees Giants. That was it. That first game was more of like a promotion of what Netflix was offering instead of the game itself. It was kind of odd. It was nice to have Matt Vasgersian there, kind of a familiar name, doing the commentary. The panel I thought was pretty decent. They were just talking baseball for the most part. You can tell it's all new, and hopefully Netflix continues to do a decent job, because it's kind of weird not seeing the home run derby on ESPN followed by the Legends and Celebrities All-Star softball game. I have to find that online elsewhere. That was sort of the thing back in the day. So all in all, it's another year of the All-Star game. You're getting what you're getting, and really at this point, unless they decide to do something drastic, like with the swing off, it's basically going to be the same thing every year. So, it wasn't bad,
Yeah, I mean, the All-Star game never really seems to change. I know last year was the first time we actually got to see the swing off in action. It's cool. Full disclosure, I worked in indie ball for 2 years. I watched plenty of those knockout rounds, and sometimes it's a struggle because you get guys going up there, and you have coaches who have to throw batting practice at the end of the game, and sometimes those go on forever and ever with people trying to get the ball out of the infield. But this year's game was kind of a snooze fest, to say the least. The runs came all in the first inning for the most part, although Miguel Vargas did hit a very long home run. That was impressive. The Derby, I mean, look, I wasn't sure what to expect with this new format. It was pretty exciting, and like you were saying, it was pretty awesome. Jordan Walker, all things against him right there, and he shows up and shocks the Philly crowd. That was pretty awesome for him to sort of play the heel in that scenario. I know that Wilson Contreras got close, and personally, I wasn't sure. After Schwarber had that monster round, if Walker had enough in the tank, but he did. And this is a guy who has had a monster breakout season after some disappointing years. It was really cool to see him do that. Overall, I mean, do I miss watching those epic rounds like Josh Hamilton had in 2008? Yes, that was that's probably my favorite home run derby highlight ever. Even more than the two that Pete Alonso won and the two that Yoenis Cespedes won. That Josh Hamilton round lives in my head rent free whenever we get to All-Star break. So yeah, I mean, I kind of miss the outs format. I mean, the clock was cool too. Yeah, I really was skeptical with this whole swings format as opposed to outs or time. The only tough part with the clock was that it's sort of I wouldn't say punished. I sort of did punish distance. It was more like, oh yeah, you have to hit so many home runs in this amount of time that we couldn't really admire the home runs. But I thought overall it was a success, and it probably went about as well as MLB wanted it to.
Yeah, no, I mean, I wasn't a big fan of the swings for the Derby. I like the clock. I think all those homers are exciting. I liked it when they changed it from the outs to that about 10 years ago, whatever it was. But the finish with Jordan Walker was awesome. Playing heel there, in Philly Stadium, that was cool. As far as the game itself, I told you guys off air. The Ray Charles America the Beautiful with the kids on the bikes, basically recreating the Sandlot scene, and then standing with the players on the field. That was the best part of the whole All-Star game. You could have turned it off right after that. Didn't need to see anything else. That was awesome. Like you said, Soto got a knock. Probably after that hit, he ran to that plane or bus so fast out of that stadium, whatever it was, to get home, I'm sure. But kind of a weird All-Star game. NL's roster, you didn't have the two best players in the sport, right? You didn't have Judge and Ohtani there, which kind of takes a hit from the whole thing. But, it felt like the NL's best players or better players were sitting on the bench, and they came in later in the game. But, a lot of strikeouts. Pitching's really good in these games. We know that. So, like you said, it probably went as well as it would go. It's supposed to be in Chicago next year. We'll see if we have it. That's a whole nother debate I keep alluding to, and I never want to talk about, but we'll get there eventually. But it was cool. Good All-Star week. It's it's the Midsummer Classic. It's a staple of the summer, right? You love watching it no matter what. Hopefully Netflix gets better at their live broadcast, because I'm not going to be the broadcast nerd here, but not great. Don't love it. That's for another time, another podcast. So we'll leave it at that. But great job, guys. Hopefully the Mets can turn things around, play a little bit more competitive. Maybe they'll get, Lindor and Soto playing a bunch of games together, Bichette as well. That'll kind of maybe get the offense going a bit more. Maybe some of these guys, second half pitching wise, the Sangers of the world, maybe they'll do something. Probably not. But we'll see, hopefully. But no matter what they do, we'll recap it here, everybody. So enjoy the last of the All-Star break. Second half begins soon. And as always, everybody, even when we don't like it, let's go Mets.
Well, one more thing. Didn't you have a question for us?
So it is a trivia question. It's about 8 guys. We can't do it on here, but we'll tweet it out. If you tweet the answers to the account later, we'll try and get the answer. Outside of Juan Soto, there have been 8 other Mets outfielders, 8 other Met outfielders that have hit 30 or more home runs as a Met. Who are they? We don't do it here. Send out your questions or your answers. Tweet it out to the show account on Twitter and we'll get the answers out to you tomorrow. That was a Mets trivia question from a friend of mine. It's a pretty good one. I got most of them. I think there's a couple that I missed, and then we actually added one to the list that my friend didn't know. So that'll be interesting to see everybody's responses. A couple are kind of, I feel like, pretty obvious. A couple maybe random ones in there, but fun trivia, right? That's what we got to do in the Mets of 17 games under 500. So that's the end of that. Thank you, John Luke, for reminding me. And again, as always, everybody, let's go Mets.